Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our third session on the Soul Foundation. What we're doing here tonight is extremely important. Thinking about UAPs, UFOs, whatever, is just part of a larger picture. We have to educate ourselves. We can't count on too many other people educating us. We think the Soul Foundation does a wonderful job in educating people. We have to come to know this. I hesitate to say that it's secondary to our spiritual growth, although it kind of is. But I'd like you to be able to see them to work hand in hand. That understanding that we're part of something bigger, whether it simply be spiritual or populated with other entities, certainly these are the things we need to consider to understand. I'm very happy to say, too, that when we conclude our evening here tonight, should we not get everything done, which might be the case, John has also consented to take it up again next week on February the 9th. So there's no hurry to get things done tonight, but just want to make sure that you ask all of your questions and feel very, very comfortable to do so. Please never forget that perhaps one of your questions is exactly what someone else is thinking. With that, let me introduce our presenter tonight again, John Shartle. And John will lead us through everything. Just want to welcome John back. So grateful, John, for all of the work you have put in the instruction you're able to share with us here this evening. John, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Vince. And thank you to everybody who's here tonight. First of all, am I coming through?
Yes.
Okay.
I think, yeah. Good.
Okay, good. Okay. Well, again, I want to thank you, Vince, for having me. It's an honor to do this. And thank you for all of you for showing up again. For many of you, this is the third evening. And it's, it's a little humbling, honestly, to have everybody be interested in the topic. So I'm really grateful that you're here tonight. I think what I want to just plant the seed with is that this is going to be an evening, I think, of maybe some, towards the end, once we cover the last part of this document, I'd like to really invite you to ask questions and maybe be open to a few thought experiments. I think that's really where this information all starts to make sense, is in the questions. You'll recall last week I said one of the most important messages that was conveyed at the Soul Foundation from one of the founders was, this really isn't about answers, it's about better questions. And I think that's really true. I think the human species is designed to want answers to things. And, for better or for worse, this is just an area where the more you dig, the more mystery there is. And so I just want you to bear that in mind and maybe, think about some questions that you might have at the end of the presentation. And the other thing I want to say is that no question is a dumb question. This is, we're all on the same playing field with this. We all are probably wondering many of the same things. So I just want you all to be comfortable and feel free to ask or suggest something. So with that being said, I think that it would be a good idea just to kind of briefly go over where we've been. And one more question, Vince. Are you getting feedback?
I am not.
Okay.
Is anyone else getting feedback that's disruptive?
Yes.
Yes.
Some of you are.
A little bit.
It might be because, Vince, when I'm on and if there's anybody else on, that might be the trick.
Let me just mute.
How about now? Good? Can you hear? Raise your thumb if you can hear me, Vince. Okay, cool. All right. So I thought it would be a good idea to go over where we've been with this journey with the Soul Foundation. The first week was an introduction of sorts. The second week, we covered a little bit more ground about some of the takeaways and the mission of Soul. And we're going to cover the conclusion and then really get into sort of more the philosophical parts of this, I think. And that's really where the rubber meets the road, when we really start thinking about all this information. So just briefly, I want to go over where we've been. We talked about the background. Soul was founded in 2023 as a think tank. It was meant to be an interdisciplinary think tank, bringing together science and anthropology and sociology and philosophy and theology, all these different groups, to take a 360 view of this really truly anomalous topic. Something that no one discipline has the market on. And I think that was really brilliant to come to that conclusion, because often this has been viewed either as science fiction or science. And now it's being viewed as a whole of humanity kind of issue, which is exactly where it belongs. So the Soul Foundation was founded in 2023. They had some main pillars that they were trying to accomplish or trying to address. And again, these are on their website, which is thesoulfoundation.org. The first one being the funding and directing of UAP research. And I'm just going to recap here. The foundation aims to be the leading source of scientific, intellectual, and policy research on these issues. The second is providing advisory research to the country, to academic organizations, to other countries, to spur and support solid research on this topic, the topic of UAPs. The third being public education. And this is kind of what they're doing now. I mean, indirectly, we're doing a public education service right now as an extension of the Soul Foundation's mission. Public education to offer insights and guidance to the public on cosmological and political implications of UAP, helping humanity understand and creatively respond to the potential existence of other intelligences in the universe. And then additionally, the foundation is committed to fostering democratic oversight of government. Hold on, my dog. Hey, it's all good. Grace, sorry guys. It's okay. So the last one being the foundation is committed to fostering democratic oversight of governmental UAP engagements, promoting transparency. That's a really key thing. And ensuring that UAP-related research is conducted in a commercially and ecologically responsible manner. I think that's really a vital one too. I mean, to really be committed to doing this in a responsible humanitarian way, I think is really, really important, and really, lifts my heart that they're committed to that. There have been two conferences, one in 2023, one in 2024. That's the one I went to. And, moving on into now Creations in Soul, Vince and I have been talking about this topic broadly, the topic of UAPs, extraterrestrial or UAP, or non-human intelligence. The Cosmic Citizens Committee was an outgrowth of that, and it just fit nicely together when the opportunity showed up to attend the Soul Foundation, because I think the Soul Foundation is kind of hand in glove with the mission of the Cosmic Citizens Committee. And it's no surprise that Vince recognized that as well, and thought it might be a good idea for somebody from Now Creations. And I was the fortunate person to be asked to attend the conference in November of last year. And I'm really, truly grateful for that. It was one of the highlights, really one of the highlights of my adult life. So I'm really grateful for that. The event itself was broken into 4 sections, as we talked about last week. Governmental challenges, understanding what is this enigma, looking at it from a philosophical lens, looking at it through a scientific lens, and then also moving on, where do we go from here? What does the future hold? What does the future hold for humanity? What does it hold for technology? From nuts and bolts considerations all the way up to the largest philosophical considerations. It was just such a broad spectrum of considerations that they covered at the event. And then the takeaways. Again, I just want to touch on those really quickly before we move into the conclusion and open it up to questions and thought experiments. I think it's worth reiterating, and you may have read this, but I think it's important to just state it out loud. The first one, and these are strictly my takeaways. This is nothing that came from the Soul Foundation. These are my impressions as I left. That the study of the UAPs, or what are often called the phenomenon, is way beyond nuts and bolts considerations. there used to be this idea back in the 40s through the 60s and the 70s, even recently, that this was a matter of, beings.
Hey, John, let me just suggest, this is on page 4 of your handouts. So just to kind of keep everything abreast of where we are, it's on page 4 that John is addressing right now.
Okay. So this was a topic that was often, brushed aside, considered fringe, considered crazy. It's not a crazy topic anymore. I think we've established that. It's not a nuts and bolts thing. It's not just about, people from some other planet traveling in a spaceship across the universe. That may be part of it, but it seems to be much, much bigger than that. So that was one of the takeaways, that this topic has moved in academic circles, which in itself is a big thing, and intellectual circles into a much larger conversation. That it touches on spirit, it touches on philosophy, it touches perhaps on religion. And that's something I'd like to talk about in the question and answer series, or part of the conversation tonight. Again, it's been moving on. It's, what was once fringe has now fully entered the mainstream. I mean, we're seeing so many movies about this. Books are being written, TV shows. There are all kinds of things that aren't demonstrating this topic to be, for people that are, hanging on the edge or are mentally ill. This is, and by the way, I want to say this is something I didn't really put into this, the takeaways, but I think it's really important to mention this. There was a time not that long ago that if you said you believed in UFOs, like you truly believed in UFOs, or you saw one, or you had an encounter, you were considered mentally ill. And, there were things that could happen to you as a result of that. God forbid a pilot, somebody who's responsible for an aircraft, to say this, you'd be taken off the flight line. You might have your license revoked. You'd be ordered to get into psychiatric care. So we've really come a long way with this, from, giggles and grins to serious academic, scientific study of this topic. There is a sense of cultural urgency that was really conveyed at the conference. And that means a lot of things, but I think what I want to tell you that it means, what it meant for me, what was maybe said in different ways, but not directly, is that there is an urgency about this because, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think there is a real sense that something really significant is on the horizon with this topic, and people need to get ready. Governments need to be ready. Citizens need to be ready. Institutions like organizations of faith need to be ready for this, because it's going to have profound implications. Nobody knows how this is going to come out. Nobody knows how this is really going to hit the public, what the reaction is going to be, but something is happening, and it's happening right now. It's not something in the future. There are things happening right now which indicate, yeah, we've crossed the threshold on disclosure. So that was really that really hit home at the conference, that we're not talking about something 15 years in the future. We're talking about something that we may be in the middle of right now. And I think there is a lot of truth to that. The other thing I want to mention is just, again, we talked about this last week, but the diversity of the presenters was amazing. All different academic disciplines were there. Philosophers, theologians, scientists, medical doctors were there. But the same was true of the audience. I mean, it was a diverse audience of people, regular people, financial people were there. There were nurses and doctors there. There were scientists there, many scientists. There were philosophers there. There were podcasters there. There were journalists there. So it really touched a lot of people. And most of those people were participants. They weren't there to report on it. They were there just like me, to gather the information and try to make sense of where this topic is in the cultural stream. And then the last thing, and I'm just going to read this because I really think this is the most important takeaway. If you have your document, you've already read it, but I want to read it for the group. The work of the Soul Foundation in advancing the study of UAPs cannot be overstated. The gathering was excellent, with every session thoughtfully designed and delivered, ensuring that no time was wasted and every presentation was impactful. Having engaged in a lot of self-study on this topic, an enormous amount of self-study, I can say that it was the finest conference I've ever been to. It was cutting edge and it was top shelf. And I do hope their efforts of the Soul Foundation and others, they can't do it alone, will drive this conversation forward going into the future, starting now and going into the future. So that's just a little bit of a recap of what we've talked about. And now we're going to get into the conclusion. And then I'd really like to just have a forum of question and answer and, thought experiments. So Vince, before I do that, I wonder, is there anything you want to say before we move forward?
No, John, I'm in pretty good shape. I think it's very important that we just realize that I want to say this in the most positive way. John is not the ultimate source of all wisdom, but he sure knows a lot more than most of us, probably all of us combined. So we're very thankful, John, that you're sharing your information with us. And yet it's up to each one of us to weigh what John is saying, see if it makes sense to us, see if it passes the test. Is it logical? Does it feel right? And can it be applicable in any particular situation? So, John, we're very excited to hear your words of wisdom, but also to realize you're the final judge. Always very important. Go ahead, John.
Indeed. Well, I'll tell you what, I need to do one thing. My dogs, for whatever reason, are making noise. I want to get them out of the room. It'll take me just about 10 seconds. So give me 10 seconds.
And just as John is doing that, I really feel that it's important for us to truly be educated in this area. There is just, as John said, there's so much to read, and it's just mind-boggling that there are a few essential facts that I think we can really get down for ourselves now that we should know. We have to be educated. Most people are not educated in this area. They have opinions, but they're really not educated. And I feel that it's very important for you to understand that this is a responsibility of moving forward for us. This is very, very important. John, before we get back to you, Connie, do you have a question?
Yes. What's the name of the organization that founded that put together the program?
It's called the Soul Foundation, SOL. SOL.
SOL Foundation. Thank you.
You're welcome. John, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks for your patience. Cheryl understands, for whatever reason, when we get on a call, the dogs decide to make themselves known. All right, so getting into the conclusion of this presentation, again, I'm going to read this and then we can move into a less structured format. The Soul Symposium proved to be an extraordinary gathering, offering a unique and comprehensive exploration of the UAP phenomenon. From the insightfulness and expertise of the speakers to the diversity of the attendees, the event underscored the importance of interdisciplinary collaboration in addressing one of humanity's most compelling mysteries. Each session provided valuable insights, sparking conversation that extended beyond the symposium itself and into the broader community of thinkers, researchers, and everyday individuals curious about UAP and their implications. My attendance at Soul, generously sponsored by Vince and Now Creations, offered much more than a deep dive into the subject of UAP and the phenomena. It served as an invitation to step beyond the boundaries of daily life and confront questions that reach into the deepest parts of our existence. This gathering reminded everyone in attendance that the mystery of UAP is not merely about what lies beyond our understanding, but also what it means within us, our sense of wonder, our sense of purpose, and our connection to the vast universe and all that is. For those who seek to further engage with these ideas, the videos from the symposium will be available on YouTube by the end of December 2024. I encourage everyone to explore them, not only to learn more about UAP, but also to join in this shared journey of discovery, reflection, and evolution. And I do want to say that the The videos are becoming available on YouTube. If you go to the Soul Foundation YouTube channel, several of them have been released. It's been a pleasure to revisit some of them, because there's a different experience when you're right there having that experience for the first time, and then you revisit it again and you go, oh yeah, I remember that person said this thing that was really mind-blowing. So I do encourage you to go and watch them. I would even go a step further and say, watch the videos from the first Soul Foundation as well. Many of the same speakers made presentations at both of them, but there are some different ones, and they're all very interesting. Some may appeal to you more than others, but all of them, well, I'll say it this way, none of them are wasted time. They're all very important and very valuable. On an unscripted note, I do want to just reiterate that this was such an important conference, and they're doing such important work. And it's hard to convey, I think, how monumental this topic is. And we all think things that we're interested in are important. I really think this is important. I think that this is probably the most important conversation we can be having today. We go through our lives, we work on, we may go to work, we may go to school, we may read, we may play with our families, and all those things are really important things. But this is happening, and it's having, in the current time, a profound effect on humanity. So I want to say that. The other thing I want to say is, again, I really want people to be inspired to look into this topic. If nothing else, it would be delightful to me that people leave these series of conversations that we've had over the past several weeks and say, well, you know what, I'm going to read a book, or I'm going to look into this, or I'm going to search out a topic. I hope you do that, because it is really important. I would also suggest to you, be discerning. There's a lot of information out there, a lot of opinions. You're going to have to make your own evaluations on what you believe and what you take away from this. Some people will look at this from a scientific view. Some will find deeply spiritual meaning in all of this. And there's all of this in this. So be discerning, please investigate it. And I would finally just like to say, if anybody would like to reach out to me and have a question or drop a line or whatever, I'm wide open to that. I would be happy to entertain that. I appreciate the kind words, Vince, that I know a lot more. I know a little bit, but I certainly don't know everything. I don't think the people that study this all the time have a fraction of the knowledge that they wish they had, and I certainly don't either. But the joy is in the journey. That's the way I look at it. And so, with that, again, I want to say thank you so much, Vince, and Now Creations, for sponsoring this event, sponsoring my attendance there. I hope I represented well. I tried to. The whole time I was there, I was thinking, I'm representing Now Creations. Make sure you're doing this right, John. And it was a joy to be there, and it's been a joy to do this. And with that, Vince, I'd like to turn it back to you, just to start the question and answer part of the evening.
Very good, John. Happy to do so. I always want to say this is probably the most important human topic to discuss, next to, but in conjunction with, our spirituality. I always like to say that. That to me is always primary, and this is right there as a part of it, that's for sure. We need to blend these two. So I'm just going to call on people, because I have wider access, I think, to all of the names on our Zoom. So if you would just raise your hand, and I'll call upon you, and then I'll mute myself and turn it over to John. So any questions, any comments you would like to raise? Mary Ann.
Yes, I just wanted to say that for the last couple of years, I've been watching this show on National Geographic called UFOs Investigating the Unknown. And a couple of weeks ago, they had quite a discussion about the Soul Foundation, put all the main people on there. They told all about the thing you were just at. And so, it's a really a good show, and it's on National Geographic on Tuesday evening.
Yes. Thank you, Marianne. Yes, I believe that's the show that is produced by a journalist named Leslie Kane. Leslie Kane has done a lot of great work, not only with the topic of UAPs, but also with out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences. She's a very open-minded, clearly an open-minded person. And she was one of the two main reporters that broke the story of the UAPs from the Navy videos back in 2017. You may be familiar with that. It's definitely something that's in the document that we did a while back about the 10 reasons you may want to consider non-human intelligence. But the 2017 New York Times article kind of broke this topic wide open in a different way than it had been in years past. And that docuseries that you're mentioning is an extension of that, Marianne. So yes, I've seen the first part. It's very good. And I think there are more episodes coming.
Let me just ask, Marianne, was there anything particular that you felt was interesting now that you know a little bit more because of what we've been doing here? Was there anything that caught your interest in that presentation on National Geographic?
Well, they did mention that lady that you said they kind of went through her biography or whatever of the show. And then it really caught my attention when they mentioned the Soul Foundation and went into detail on that. It's like they're open to discussing anything.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, you know, I'm sorry. Thank you, Marianne. You know, I met her at the conference. What was really kind of an interesting kind of a side note when I was there at the conference was that, you know, there are all these people that are involved in this, really heavyweights in this topic, and it was just so surreal, I guess is the word, to be surrounded by all these people that you've read their books, you've read their articles, you've seen them on TV, and they were all there. And Leslie was one of them. And I happened to have the good fortune to bump into her and, you know, share a few words with her and tell her how much I admired her. And she was very gracious and kind, as, you know, I would have expected her to be. Everybody was gracious and kind, but she was particularly warm, and I was very, very pleased to meet her. So to your point, Marianne, I would say, yes, that's a show worth watching.
I think it's terrific that John met Leslie Keane there and shared nice words with her. And it seems to me you represented Now Creations quite well. Any other comments or questions that you would like to raise?
I have a question.
Go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead, Tony.
I mean, unless somebody else has their hand up, I have a question for the group. Oh, go ahead, Nancy.
I have a ton of questions.
Okay.
First of all, John, let me just ask, everything considered, and I know you gave us in number 5 your takeaways about the quality of the presentation, but what if someone were to ask you, what really impressed you about the Soul Foundation? If you had to just nuggetize it into 1 or 2 things, what are the things that just really impressed you about the Soul Foundation?
That, let me try and nuggetize that, as you said. I appreciated their level of, I don't want to use the word professionalism because that sounds so sterile, seriousness, depth that they treated this subject with. And I appreciated their willingness to touch on, well, I won't say it's not a past tense thing. I admire them for their willingness to bring in so many different voices on this. You know, like I've given you the list of areas of disciplines that they're touching on. And I mentioned this before too, but, you know, they're open-minded, but they're not pushovers. You know, they're like they really are open-minded. But that's not to say that everything that comes their way is the truth or is not the truth. They're very discerning, but they are truly dedicated to addressing this mystery on an intellectual level, on a scientific level, as well as what does this mean for humanity? What does this mean for everyday people in their lives? in every facet of their lives. So that's not really a good nugget, but I think it's the serious and open-minded approach that they have to this topic. That's the best nugget I can form for you right now.
Thank you, John. Any other questions or comments? John Hoops.
Couple of questions, but I'll stick to this one first. If John, were talking to someone and mentioned that I attended some meetings with a person who was at the Soul Foundation and explained about UAPs and so forth, and they seemed somewhat interested without throwing tons of information at them. And is there one book, one video that would be the very first one that would help them, kind of lead them into more curious? Is that a fair question to ask?
Yeah, it's a fair question. And I'm going to give you two things. I mean, there's a wealth of stuff out there. As you probably, I think, John, you've already started reading some books and things, and there's a wealth of stuff out there, and you can get into the deep end of the pool pretty quickly. I would say two things. First of all, go to the Soul Foundation website. They have an introductory video that kind of just tells you what they're about and who they are, what they're about, and what they're trying to do. And I think about 8 minutes. It's a really good sort of like introduction. And the other thing I would do if I were telling somebody, like, just where do I even begin with this topic? There are a lot of different ways that you can begin with this. And frankly, depending on your perspective of the world and depending on many things, but you didn't ask that. You asked my take on it. And what my take would be, I would recommend to go to get a podcast. And the podcast is called The UFO Rabbit Hole. And the UFO Rabbit Hole is a podcast that was started back, I think, in 2022, maybe, by a woman named Kelly Chase. Kelly is, I think she was raised in Akron. I think she still lives in Cleveland, but she has become one of the bigger voices in this conversation. She's very, very smart. That's why. She's smart, she's gifted, she's talented, and she has terrific communication style. So her podcast will take you from what is this even about to some really pretty complex things in the course of just episodes. They're 1 hour episodes. Kelly has actually moved on. She's making movies now. She made a docuseries called Cosmosis, which is also very good. But I would say start there. That's the place to start. You can find it on YouTube. You can listen to it on the podcast in your car. It's available everywhere. That would be my starting point. And start from the first episode and go forward.
Thank you, John. Very helpful. Thank you.
Indeed.
Are there questions, comments? Actually, let me just interrupt for a moment on this. John, you mentioned there was a video shown at the Soul Foundation. I think you said it was called The Program. Okay.
Yes, the program. Would you like me to tell you about that, Vince, or did you want to comment on that?
No, I'd like, I don't know about it, so I'd like you to comment on that for the group. This might be another thing, another video. I don't know if it's out yet.
Yes, it is. So the program. So let me give you a little background. There's a documentary filmmaker named James Fox, and he has done a number of videos related to this topic. They're all very good. The most recent one, though, is called The Program, and it's really about the let's call it I don't want to use the word cover up. It's basically the evidence of the fact that this program, this has existed for a long time and the government's hiding it. That's basically what the essence of it is. And he goes through a number of interviews and talks to a lot of people about it. But basically, the takeaway of this from this show is that, yeah, there's something there that just has not been exposed to the American public. And he does a really good job of taking you through that. In fact, Leslie Kane, that we just talked about, makes an appearance in this show as well. We saw it at the it was a late night offering at the Soul Foundation. It was very good. It is more of a, what does the government know that they're not telling you kind of a program, which is important. It's not going to tell you what it is. It doesn't try to talk about what are we even talking about here. It's talking about the fact that there has been a 75 to 80 year, I'll just use the term cover up, that the government has known about this, and for reasons that may actually be defendable on some level, they have largely hidden it from the American people. And it's now coming out in a way that it's kind of like the fire hose, it's coming out now, and they're kind of scrambling on how to manage this information. It's no longer keeping it hidden. It's about managing the information the best they can. So it was very, very good. It's one perspective on this topic. I would definitely say watch it, but understand that it is not the only perspective on this topic.
Thank you, John. Would you comment at all about the book by Luis Elizondo called Immanent? Did you think that would be something that would be kind of interesting? And perhaps also mention it in conjunction with the book by Jacqueline Smith that Doug reported on, Star Being in the Mirror, which is a kind of another side. Would you care to comment on either or both of those two books, John?
Yeah, so let me tell you a little bit about who Lou Elizondo is. Lou Elizondo, this goes back to 2017 when Leslie Kane wrote this article. She wrote the article about Lou Elizondo. And Lou is, his name is Luis, he goes by Lou. Lou was a former intelligence guy in the military. He was in the Army, and he was recruited back in the early, maybe 2009, 2008, to work around a program called ATIP, which is the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. Everything in the government has an acronym, as I well know. Basically, this organization hidden in the Pentagon, it was a black budget program, which basically means that it was not identifiable through congressional records. It was basically money that was sort of siphoned off from other programs to fund something that they don't want you to know about, frankly. It was done at the request of Senator Harry Reid, who at the time was I think he was the Senate Majority Leader. Harry Reid was a very powerful senator from Nevada who was very much interested in this topic. So anyway, all that to say, Lou Elizondo was in the government and became very frustrated with the fact that he was trying to get this information about the reality of this program out to the public. He was actually trying to get it to the Secretary of Defense, because the Secretary of Defense didn't even know that this program existed. He couldn't get there. He resigned in protest, and he's been a leading voice in this conversation ever since. He's been out there. He's been on innumerable podcasts, interviewed. He was on 60 Minutes a few years ago. That may be something that you may want to look into, the 60 Minutes broadcast that had him in it. But that brings us to Immanent, which is the book that he wrote. It was released last August, I think. And basically, it's a discussion of his journey through this topic, from being a guy who grew up not knowing anything about UFOs or UAPs, not thinking about them very much, and then being brought into this very secret program at the Pentagon and really having his eyes open to the reality of this, going from like, yeah, that's what crazy people think about, to, oh my gosh, this is real. This is real. And not only that, we're trying to manage it. But the book is good. It's written from his perspective. And you have to sort of put everything in its category. Lou is he's a former military guy. He's a patriotic guy. He says that all throughout the book. He just believes that the government shouldn't be sitting on this information. He believes absolutely that it's true, based on his own witnessing to a lot of information. And he believes that the American people have a right to know that this is, there's this really vital information that affects our perception of reality. We have a right to know that. So Immanent's a good book. You know, he's a guy that doesn't, he says all the time that he's agnostic on the topic. He doesn't come down and say, whatever they are, whatever it is entirely benevolent or it's entirely malevolent. We just don't know. You know, we don't know what it is, but there's definitely an it. So I read the book. Vince, I think you read the book. I think it's well worth reading. I think he's a very credible guy. And I appreciate the fact that what he does is he says, I don't know. You know, when people say, I don't know a lot, I give them a lot of credibility, because it's the people that seem to know everything and have the whole thing packaged up. Well, you know, I wonder about those folks. So yes, I would definitely encourage you to read the book. I would say it's a little bit further along. Yeah, it's a little bit more advanced because there's a lot of discussion in there of physics and government programs and things. You might want to dip your toe in a little lighter fare on this topic.
Thank you, John. A couple of things in that book that I thought were interesting were it not from Louis Elizondo doing his work, we would not have had the release of the Navy pilots' videos. That was enormous. That was enormous. And that's where I think Leslie Kean eventually was able to obviously get the information, became public knowledge. That was huge. I thought the other thing that was interesting was the fact that Luis Elizondo said there is something going on, and if nothing else, the government should really be looking into it, just because of safety, let alone perhaps maybe a threat. So I just thought those were very practical things that we could take away from that. And the book Star Being in the Mirror by Jacqueline Smith is she's considered to be a hybrid, both human and non-human. It's a wonderful, interesting book. It's more of an experiential encounter. Star Being in the Mirror by Jacqueline Smith. Just an interesting book. Karen or Tim?
Okay.
I have a couple of questions. This is a think tank, basically, where all these entities, these people come together and study and bounce things off of each other, right?
Yeah, essentially, Tim, it's a gathering of a group of people from all different sectors of society. A lot of academic people coming in from science, biology, physics, philosophy, because the understanding of this, such as it is, I'd say understanding, we don't understand it, and so what they're saying is, look, we need everybody to look at this. We need this to be everybody looking at this. It can't just be the military that's looking at it. It can't just be scientists that are looking at it. We need sociologists to be looking at this. We need psychologists. When and if there's a revelation that yes, this is real, there are truly, non-human intelligences here on Earth, there are going to be psychological needs that people have. There's going to be a real adjustment. So everybody needs to be sort of working together on this. And so, yes, that's the short answer. Yes, you're exactly right.
So the funding has to come from somewhere. They have government funding, right?
They do not.
Not at all.
No, there's no government funding. They're funded by individual donors. They're fundraising. That's definitely part of it, but it is not government funded.
Okay. So there must be some reason or multiple reasons that if this is all true and factual, that the government does not want you to know. That could be anything from we can't handle the truth to, they're learning things that they're keeping secret. Okay. Through maybe reverse engineering, things like that. And there must be some reason, if this is all true, that these entities from other places don't want us to know exactly. Or they would just expose themselves and let us deal with it the best that we could. So there must be some reason that they're keeping it quiet, that they may be doing whatever they're doing, but they're not out in the open about it. And there would have to be a reason for that. And I'm not sure. Those are my two questions. Yeah.
Well, I think Tim, I think you're hitting the nail on the head here. I think this is what this is all circling around, to be honest with you. You know, this is a subject that really starts with why didn't we know about this? Why haven't we known about this for so long? And the fact of the matter is, we kind of have. It's been hiding in plain sight in many ways. Since this whole topic for the modern era starts, they had to start it somewhere. It starts in 1947. In 1947, two things happened. One happened in June of 1947 in Washington State. There was a guy named Kenneth Arnold, and he was just a businessman who happened to be a pilot flying home to Idaho from somewhere in Washington, and he's flying past Mount Rainier, and he sees these 9 silver discs go flying by. He thought he was crazy, he didn't know what, he thought it was the sun, he didn't know what to think. And so he reported it, and there was a big sort of news flourish about that. Well, in July, a month later of 1947, there was the Roswell crash. And, I'm sure you've heard about the Roswell crash. There was this event in New Mexico, and they went out, and there was this, wreckage on the site of a rancher's, site of a ranch. And the newspaper in New Mexico actually reported that the Army had recovered a flying disc. And then the next day they came back and said, oh, it was just a weather balloon. And those were the days, honestly, when people just believed what they read in the paper. If you read it in the paper, it's true. If the government says it, it's true, by and large. And so it just kind of went away for many years until some other people started to dig into it. But to your point, there are many reasons that are speculated. And I think you touched on some of them. What does happen if we discovered that this is true? What do we do if this is kind of the essential question that has been debated over and over and over again. What happens to society when we realize we're not at the top of the food chain? And I'm just going to put it like that. When we realize that there are beings or entities that are far superior to us in their technology, maybe in their knowledge, and maybe don't really think that we're all that great. Maybe that's one part of it. Or maybe they do. Maybe they're part of our evolution. There are theories that maybe they are literally the beings from which we sprouted, that they have somehow influenced our DNA. And again, this sounds kind of out there. I fully recognize that. But those kinds of things, if you are just an average person and suddenly you have to come to grips with that, that's a lot. What about people who are profoundly religious in a traditional religion, where you have a very strict way of looking at the world and that mankind is the top of the food chain? Well, suddenly maybe mankind is sharing the top of the food chain, or maybe we're not at the top of the food chain. What does that do to your relationship with God? What does it mean if you're a devout Christian and suddenly you're having to come to terms with that? I don't have the answer to that. I just know that these are questions that to your point, are some of the things that are being asked now. And the Soul Foundation is trying to lead those conversations in a gentle way, because this is big stuff. There's this term that gets used called ontological shock, which is where suddenly your whole worldview changes. That's what we may be dealing with here. If this comes to pass, in all kinds of different ways, we may be dealing with a culture that goes into shock with the reality of this. So I could overtalk this, and I'm probably doing that now, but I hope that answers your question, or at least starts to.
Yes, it starts to. Also, with all the turmoil and all the disruptions in governments and global warming, maybe our days are numbered, and maybe they may come out. Maybe they're saviors.
You know,
who knows, you know? But
who knows? You know, one of the things that is kind of a theme, you know, and again, I'm not drawing any conclusions. Nothing I say is meant to draw a conclusion. But one of the things that's very interesting is that not just in the United States, all over the world, and this is highlighted in Lou Elizondo's book, is for whatever reason, these craft, if you want to call them that, or these orbs, are very attracted to nuclear energy. You have to ask why. What is it about that they're interested in? Is it, you know, there's a theory that goes that they were kind of just good. They were fine to leave us alone, basically, until we found the bomb, until we exploded the nuclear bomb, and then it created a whole other dynamic. You know, we weren't just monkeys playing nice in the sandbox. We were monkeys with chainsaws now. That's the analogy that gets used, you know, and that's dangerous, you know, and that may have some impact, not just on our own reality, but somehow on their reality too. Maybe they are residents of this planet, maybe under the earth, maybe under the water. And if we're dropping nuclear bombs now, well, they have a vested interest in what's going on. So, you know, again, a lot of this is just speculation. I know that, but these are the deeper questions that I think are important to consider. And I think you hit the nail right on the head.
Let me just add, I thought too that one of the aspects of the Soul Foundation is to indicate the fact that they're not going to just take any solution, anything off the top of someone's head. They're going to research it, see what kind of academic basis is behind it. So you have to rely on some organization to give you the truth. And it just seems to me that one of the things that they're doing is they're not going to take a casual maybe answer, that is really going to be researched. That's enormously important. So it's like what Tim was saying, well, who knows? You have to be able to rely on some larger group who might at least tell you, well, it's not that. It could be this. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a very important thing for us. And Karen, did you have a comment, or did we answer your questions? Just wanted to make sure you're okay. Okay. Connie.
Yes, I just have one question. Is the organization getting anthropological input as well as the other types of input they're looking for?
Yes, that's a big part of it, actually. In fact, if you go back, yes. So the short answer is yes. They have anthropologists working on this because it is well understood that this will have large anthropological implications. And if you go back to the very first, I think it's the first video of the first conference back in 2023, it's a discussion of exactly that. What are the anthropological implications of this study? It got discussed again when I was there, but it was a little bit more directly discussed in the year before I was there. I mean, you know, yeah, this is, frankly, it's an anthropology issue in many ways. You know, from you know, what does this mean for us now? And also, if you get to the idea of, well, maybe they haven't been here since 1947, or maybe they haven't been observing us, if you believe this. Maybe they've been here for thousands of years. Maybe they've literally influenced the cultures of the world for thousands of years. The Egyptians, the Mayans, all of these cultures all over the world, which have these great mysteries around them. You know, and again, I'm not drawing conclusions, but it is kind of interesting that there are so many mysteries about these cultures, what they did, how they did them. Was there any influence from some source that we don't quite understand that may have been non-human?
Thank you, John. John Hoops.
Not quite sure how to pose this, but I'll try. I know we've said many times in our meetings that every situation or problem has a spiritual solution. So I really feel this is a big part,
Hmm.
because this doesn't scare me. It's almost refreshing or verifying that we are part of something bigger. It just seems plausible. It feels right, to be honest with you. And so I see the spiritual aspect being a big part of this. And the question I want to ask, and perhaps more to Vince or anybody that would like to answer the question. When I was listening to the Jake Barber interview, near the end, he talked about the ability for mind control or consciously. He gave an example of he was with a group that consciously invited a UAP, the white egg, and they videotaped this experience, which is pretty mind blowing. But then the conversation turned to this mind control, where they're worried that some entity could control the mind for evil purposes. And that didn't seem right to me, because we've always talked about, it seems to me that this conscious control is at a pretty high conscious level to be doing something like that. And that would be possible for someone in the fifth dimension or higher.
Hmm.
And in that fifth dimension and higher, only love exists. So my conclusion is it's for the good of the whole. So I'm just putting that out there and wondering if that makes any sense.
Oh, John, I mean, you're getting into the secret sauce now. I think that's where this is going. What you're talking about right now with Jake Barber, and now that's sort of expanded to a number of other people. I think we're going to be hearing so much more on this. And if the other folks in the room don't know what we're talking about, there is now a lot of information that's coming out about the
Excuse
fact
me,
that
John, would you give a little background on Jake Barber, because some people may not be aware of that? Would you give just a
Sure.
little background, please?
Sure. Jake Barber is a guy that he is what is being referred to as a first-hand whistleblower. I'm not sure I love the term whistleblower. It sounds very alarmist, but he's a first-hand witness to unidentified aerial phenomenon. His initial interview was about 2 weeks ago on News Nation with Ross Coulthart. Since then, there have been a few more people that have been interviewed that have validated his or backed him up. Basically, he's a pilot, a helicopter pilot that worked with the Army, for the Army, and with the Army as a civilian in kind of a secret squirrel kind of way. And his job basically was to recover craft, mostly craft that crashed, that were made by human beings, that made by the United States. It's experimental craft that crashed in the desert. But on a few occasions, he had I won't say the opportunity. He was charged with recovering unknown craft that came down, that he is absolutely certain were of non-human origin. One was an egg, and the other one was an octagonal sort of shaped disc craft. And he had a profound experience.
When you say an egg, John, you don't mean obviously one laid by a hen.
Oh, no.
Yeah, would you just maybe describe that a little bit better for us?
He said it was an egg-shaped, he said it was an egg-shaped object that was about 20 feet long. So about 20 feet long, maybe 9 feet high. And he was commissioned to come out with his helicopter and his crew to get this thing scooped up and then brought to another location where it was taken by government vehicles to an unknown location. And when he did this, everything was different than his normal protocols, which was his first signal. And then when he encountered this, we're calling it the egg, this craft that looked like an egg, he had a profoundly spiritual experience, where he had some kind of connection, like a telepathic connection with this craft, or whatever was connected to the craft. And to hear him describe it, he says it was a very, like a loving energy, a very feminine energy that he felt. And he was moved to tears in the interview. And John, I know you've seen it, but yeah, he was very moved by this. But the term that's being used right now, the Jake Barber is now coming out and saying, yes, we're doing this now. He's doing this as a private person now. He's working with others to say, this, we don't need the government to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to bring this to the people. We're going to make sure that people know that this is a real thing. And what this has come down to is this kind of mind-blowing approach, which is what they're calling, it's called psionics, which is basically telepathy of a sort, where there is conscious communication with a craft or with another entity to communicate with these things, to direct them, to engage with them. And one of the things that has come out, there's just a lot more to it than that. But one of the things, John, that you said that is, I think, really important is that, yes, there's this whole idea of, well, what if somebody gets hold of this technology that doesn't have good intentions? But I think Jake said this, and this has been said in other forums, like the telepathy tapes, that you can't use these techniques if you're not in a state of love. Like even in the telepathy tapes, which we talked about last week, which has to do with nonverbal autistic children, there are people that tried to engage with the children that were not believers, that thought it was a bunch of hokum. They couldn't connect with these children. It was only the people that were connecting or trying to connect with them that were in a state of love that it worked. And Jake said something along those lines too. There's not any intention to, be malicious with this communication. There's an open-hearted approach to this, which I think is entirely in alignment with our spiritual values. I don't think we know the answer to this, but it seems at this point that this is very much aligned with really, basic fundamental principles of love. John, did you want to add anything to that maybe I'm missing?
Not really, John. It just is a feeling of comfortability for me, and I totally understand that there's a lot of fear in the world, and this would probably be a little overload for a lot of people. But I think people in this ilk and in our classes, this is not threatening. I'll just speak for myself. I don't feel threatened. I mean, it's exciting and interesting, and I like what you talked about, the element of love.
Yeah.
That's Thank you.
Thank you, John. And I think, one thing I would just offer to the group, just to consider, and Cheryl and I have talked about this on a number of occasions, is that when this thing sort of rolls out in a larger fashion, that it's more discussed in the media, wherever this goes, it's going to catch a lot of people by surprise. There are people just go about their day every day and they don't think about this at all. And when it comes to light, people are going to be looking for support systems in many ways, because there is going to be fear, and I think that's where I think that, I and Cheryl and other people, Vince, and maybe all of us can serve that role, to be helpful to people who go through this state of shock. Like they weren't thinking about it at all, and suddenly there it is on their doorstep. And I think it's going to be up to kind souls to be there to say, you know what, this is going to be okay. This is just the next step. It's going to be okay. So I think the more informed we are about this topic, the more service we can be to people when that critical mass happens and people are looking for answers and help and other things. And so I'm hopeful that I'll be able to serve that, and maybe we all can serve that role when the time comes. Because we certainly have a good, kind group here.
That was well spoken, John. Thank you. Karen, and then Cheryl.
I feel bad that I'm backing out of the sauce because that my question is of another nature, but I really think that this is an important area, the connection of spirituality, and how I'd say a lot of us find this completely non-threatening and very fascinating, interesting, and that we look at it with open mind. But now I'm going to go back and ask my question, and maybe we'll come back to this. That when you spoke of them talking of weather balloons in the past, not too long ago, do you remember there was the Chinese weather balloon that was going slowly across? That I have a question about. Did people feel that, that was something other than from this planet? And then number two, there was the discussion of, the drones, and everybody was saying, we don't know what it is, and everything more recently. And it was happening during the Biden administration. And before he was President Trump made the comment in a very suspicious way, well, they know what it is. They're just not letting you know. And then, lo and behold, his press secretary says afterwards, oh, this was all known, and we know what it was. And some of them were local drones, but others, we know the source of them and nothing to worry about. I'm just wondering if you're within your group of people, that if they had reactions to any of those occurrences.
Well, I can't speak for the president. I will say this. I have come to a place, I just don't believe anything anybody says anymore, because Karen, I saw the same thing you did. The drones were crazy. There is no reason in the world. It defies explanation that we had, not just this year, but last year, we had these unknown things flying over some of our most sensitive military bases in Langley, in California. They had to move I'm just going to speak here candidly. They had to move some of our most expensive fighter jets out of Langley, Virginia, to another base, Langley, Virginia, right by Washington, D.C., because there were these drones that they couldn't identify. I mean, that defies logic. This is the most sophisticated military in the world. They had to know what they were. And then it happens again. And then the outgoing administration says, well, it's nothing to see here. And the incoming administration says, oh, we're going to tell you what it is. And by the way, just as a point of fact, I'm just going to tell you as a point of fact, when somebody is elected president, they get the exact same security briefing that the outgoing president gets. So the president knew, our current president knew before he was the president, whatever they are. So then he has this very low-key statement, his press secretary, of they were approved research. There were some approved research drones. That makes no sense. And I'll tell you why. I worked for the government. I know when they're putting out information where you think they're telling you something and they're really not. And that was a classic case of it. Research drones, what does that mean? So I don't know what they are, and maybe we'll never know. But my personal belief is there's a lot more to that story than they're telling us. And maybe, you know what? Here's the thing. And this kind of goes down the rabbit hole a little bit. There's this sense that within the intelligence community, presidents are viewed as temporary employees. These people are the keepers of all this sacred information. Presidents come and go. There's no need to tell them. So I don't know if he's been told, he hasn't been told, officially or unofficially, but maybe they just said, you know what? No, we're not telling you what they are. I mean, that's a possibility. Seems crazy, but you know, if you, even at the Soul Foundation, so I'll speak from that point of view. One of the speakers, who is a very highly credible former government physicist, said he is absolutely certain that the list of presidents who knew and didn't know is pretty public. Eisenhower knew, Truman knew, Kennedy knew, Johnson didn't know. I mean, there's this whole list of who knew and who didn't know because they just didn't want to tell them. So I'm getting into stuff that's probably way beyond your question here, but I mean, it's a kind of a case of don't get me started on this, because it really is nonsense.
So let me interrupt just for a moment then. I think Karen asked about the weather balloon supposedly from China. I think, and that was, I think we want to address that. And my brief understanding of some of the things was that actually in the 40s, the United States government was using weather balloons as possible spying opportunities as well. So it goes back many, 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 many years ago. So that's just a little bit that I know. But John, could you speak to the seemingly the China incident with the weather balloon that came across?
Sure. So back in, I was it 2023, early 2023, I think. Yeah, there was a spy balloon that drifted across the continental United States. I think it was first spotted in Washington State, or maybe out in the Pacific, and it drifted across, and it was a spy balloon. It was a genuine spy balloon. The decision was made, for whatever reason, to wait till it crossed the United States, was out over the ocean, and then they shot it down. And it was, in fact, a spy balloon. There really was. Coincidentally, there were, at the same time, within a matter of days, there was a similar incident over Lake Huron, and there was another incident over the Yukon. Two more things were brought down. Now, those whatever those things were, we've never been told. The official line is that they've not been recovered, and we don't know what they are. I can't speak to that. Sounds a little nutty to me, but that's the line. But I think what's going on here is, you know, to a certain extent, many people think in binary terms. It's either this or it's that. Either it's all Chinese spy balloons or it's all UFOs. And I think we have a lot of stuff up in the air right now. I mean, there are a lot of things up there, crazy things that we don't understand. We have, you know, we have satellites and planes and all kinds of things that many people could mistake for, you know, non-human intelligence, that are just our craft. The kind of things that Jake Barber was mostly collecting out in the desert. But that doesn't mean that's what they all are. You know, there are plenty of indications that there are just anomalous things up there that are not balloons, that it's real easy for the government or for other entities to say, oh yeah, that's just a plane, or oh, that's just a balloon. Well, I don't think that's the case. I don't think it's all anything. It's a mix of things, and a lot of it's anomalous. So, you know, it's kind of convenient to say, well, they're drones. Well, maybe they're drones. Maybe some of them are drones, but I feel pretty strongly that they're not all drones.
Thank you, John. I hope that was an adequate answer, Karen. Cheryl.
So, John, could you tell us just a little bit about Dr. Diana Pasulka's two books, American Cosmic, and then her most recent book, Encounters? I think some of our friends may have some interest in those two books.
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. So let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Pasulka. Diana Walsh Pasulka is the chair of the Department of Religious Studies at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. She's a very brilliant woman. And back about 2010, her area of study, there's a little bit of background. All of this stuff requires a little bit of background. Her area of study is Catholicism and Catholic, Catholic mysteries. She looked a lot into things like the Fatima event, and, you know, angelic stuff, you know, angels showing up and having revelations to saints. And she approached this, she was looking at the study of UFOs and UAP as a topic of sort of like, oh, this is kind of a new thing, or a new way of looking at an old thing. There's things in the sky, etc. She was very much convinced that this was basically kind of like an emerging, I don't know if she called it a cult, but basically an emerging sort of quasi-religion. And she was going to write a book to kind of talk about this, like this phenomenon of this event that's not really a thing, but it looks like old Catholicism. And to tell her, when you hear her tell her story, she started researching this, and pretty quickly into the process, she realized this isn't a bunch of nonsense. This is actually real. I'm dealing with a real phenomenon here. This isn't just mythology. So, she kind of had this paradigm shift in her own life. And that's really what the book, I'm sorry, what's the first book called? American Cosmic. It's called American Cosmic. It's a great book about her study of this topic. And I would encourage everybody to pick it up. If you want to sort of, let's call it a more metaphysical take on this, I would encourage you to read this book, because it's really just a really great perspective on this.
John, let me ask you again to rename the book and the author, please.
So the author is Diana Walsh Pasulka, Pasulka. And her two books are called, the first one was American Cosmic. And then the second one, which came out, I think 2 years ago, is called Encounters. American Cosmic is effectively, it's her journey into this topic, and it's very good, and who she met along the way. And she met some really interesting people and had some really interesting experiences, including going to the Vatican to gather information. Her second book, which is called Encounters, when I first read the book, I don't think I understood the book, but what I kind of come to realize is it's her effort to show you how many different angles there are on this topic, from nuts and bolts to people having just anomalous experiences of all different kinds, and how it attaches to this topic, some of which don't immediately appear to be directly connected to this topic, but which are, because they're very personal and individual experiences. It's an interesting book. It's a very thought-provoking book. So I would encourage both of those books if you want to have a sort of a non-nuts and bolts, experience with this topic. And I would definitely start with American Cosmic. I know, Vince, I think you read one of them. I don't know which one. I think you read one of them. Do you want to touch on that?
I read the book Encounters, and I thought essentially what she said in the book, I thought it was going to be more descriptive of the encounters, which it was not. What it was pretty much a one-sided view on what certain people felt about things that they experienced, which was quite interesting. And you're quite correct. It talks about different way different people responded to what they considered to be encounters, as well as how the secrecy of the government was trying to diminish their view of things and so on. It was a good book. I would not put it in my top 3. That was just my impression. But it's a good book. It's a good book by, I think, written by a very savvy woman. Absolutely.
I would say, I would agree with you, Vince, in that it is not a starter book. It's definitely one, once you're familiar with the topic and familiar sort of with the breadth of things, you can kind of grasp it a little better. John Hoops.
Well, I thank you for that information, the question and the answer. I'll apologize. I just Googled the book, and up came this quotation, which just kind of blew me away. I thought it was really, when you said she's very intelligent and so forth. So here was her, it's just kind of a brief, I suppose, to make you want to buy the book, but it kind of made me want to buy the book. She says, once the phenomenon once the phenomenon contacts humans, from wherever it originates, it leaves a signature. That signature is traceable. It is physical, physiological. It is processed then in a world that tools of science can study. We can identify it. There's a lot packaged into that quotation. And actually, from what we've been talking about lately, when it says science, we've been talking about spiritual science. I think it still goes back to this, we're calling it a science of spirituality. That's something we're really investigating. Yeah, but just wanted to share that. Yeah.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Yeah.
Are there any other questions at this time? So here's my take where we are. We just have 4 or 5 minutes left, and I have some more questions personally. So this is John. If this again is good for you, I would like to have us meet again next Sunday night. But I'd like to make a couple of comments. First of all, I know many of you quite well. You're very intelligent. I'd like you to maybe frame a question or two. You have a chance to think about these things. And I'd just like to encourage you to maybe, should you decide to join us, to frame a question. John is very knowledgeable. He can give us some good direction. So I just encourage each of you to think about having a question for yourself. I know I have a few more personally that I want to ask, but it's mostly about information from each one of you. So between now and then, should you be joining us, and we will do this again next Sunday evening, I just ask that you develop a question perhaps for yourself. I think that's something that would be a good thing for all of us to hear. So I would just encourage you to take the time to do that. It would be profitable, I think, to all of us. With that in mind, John, is there any final comment you would like to make tonight and looking to again to next week?
Again, I want to bring this full circle and again, just express my gratitude for being able to have this experience and to represent Now Creations and to, bring this information back, as an ambassador maybe to the conference and then back to Now Creations. And so I'm really grateful about that. It was a very large experience for me. And I it's so large that sometimes it's hard to package it into just conversation, but it was a very large experience, much larger than I thought it would be. And I guess I would just, leave with a question, really, a question that I have, I've been considering since I went, and it's this, how does this, or how would this affect your spiritual growth and experience? How does this touch on your spiritual growth and experience? When you consider this idea, if you've never considered it before, or if you're just considering it now, how does it feel for you spiritually? Because I think I'm going to go back to what John said. It's not fearful for me. It's not fearful, and I don't think it should be fearful for anybody, because I think it's really very much, in ways that maybe we don't understand, in alignment with our spiritual growth. And that's just how I feel about it.
Thank you, John. That's a good question for us, that's for sure. And that might be one just worth considering, that's for sure. Let me thank everyone for certainly being in attendance tonight. We need to know more about these things. Again, I'll say, next to our spirituality, I think this is a very pressing worldwide and beyond planet Earth situation. This is pretty important for us. So I encourage us, while we have the time, we have the focus, to be able to use this information. Tim, I want to go back to you. This is not government funded. That's a very important thing to keep in mind. It is not government funded. So that you might want to think about making a donation to the Soul Foundation. I personally have and will continue to do so because I think the work they're doing is very important. So with that in mind, let me thank all of us for sharing this evening, and let's close as we normally do. I am an eternal being of light and love. Thus, only good can come to me, and only good can come from me. And we are eternal beings of light and love. Thus, only good can come to us, and only good can come from us. Namaste. And let me just simply ask if you would wait until I shut off the recording.